The thing that saved you is now holding you back. Good afternoon. I want to start today by introducing you to someone whose voice is reshaping the way Black women think about strength, survival, and what it actually means to live in peace. Her name is India McLane, and what India is doing in the world is nothing short of revolutionary. She is helping women untangle one of the most dangerous myths we have ever been taught, that the strategies that kept us alive are the same ones that will carry us into peace. They are not. India McLane is the creator of a movement that refuses to let Black women shrink, suffer in silence, or sacrifice their well being on the altar of productivity. She's teaching women how to unlearn survival mode and step into something most of them have never experienced: softness without guilt, rest without shame, boundaries without apology. Her work is saving lives, it is restoring joy, and it is dismantling the lie that Black women must always be strong, always be available, always be everything to everyone except themselves. So today I want to share with you the insights from my conversation with India, because what she revealed to me has the power to change the way you see your own life. And I want to ask you a question that might make you uncomfortable. What if the very thing that saved you is now the thing holding you back? Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. The hyper independence that got you through a season when no one showed up, the overfunctioning that kept your household running when everything was falling apart, the emotional distance that protected your heart when trust felt impossible, the constant forgiveness that kept the peace when conflict felt too dangerous. These were survival skills, and they worked. They got you here. But here's the uncomfortable truth that India McLean helped me see with stunning clarity. Survival skills are not always sustainable skills. What you needed in one season, what you had to become in order to endure, may now be blocking the very peace, support, and healthy connection you are desperately seeking. For Black women, especially, women who have been conditioned to carry everything, to be strong at all costs, to never ask for help, this realization is both liberating and terrifying, because if survival mode is all you know, softness can feel like weakness, rest can feel like irresponsibility, boundaries can feel like betrayal, but they are not. Softness, rest, boundaries, and emotional wellness are not luxuries. They are not signs of fragility. They are part of sustainable success. And until we understand that, we will keep running on fumes, calling it strength. Let me tell you about a woman named Centrell Jones. In a podcast episode that should be required listening for every Black woman entrepreneur, Jones made an argument that shakes the foundation of how we think about leadership and success. The episode was called Softness is Strategy. And in it, Jones said something radical. She said that Black women entrepreneurs can build sustainable success by centering softness, support, rest, and boundaries rather than grind culture, not in addition to their work, as the foundation of their work. Now, let that sink in for a second, because the challenge Jones identified is real, and it is crushing women every single day. Black women are under immense pressure to prove their strength by overworking, suppressing emotion, and carrying everything alone. The world rewards endurance. It celebrates the woman who never complains, never rests, never asks for anything. And so Black women have learned to survive by overextending themselves. They have learned that softness is a risk they cannot afford. But Jones reframes the entire conversation. She says emotional wellness is not an optional extra. Boundaries are not something you add when you have time. Community care is not a luxury you indulge in after you have made it. These things are foundational business infrastructure. Softness is not the opposite of strength, it is strategy. Support is not a sign of weakness, it is a business asset. And the result of this shift, a more sustainable model of leadership. where success includes well being, not just output, where you measure progress not only by revenue or impact, but by how much joy, health, and freedom you can sustain. This is not about working less. It is about building differently. It is about recognizing that the model we inherited, the one that says you have to grind until you break, is not the only model. And it is certainly not the healthiest one. India McLane echoed this in our conversation. And she said something I have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, peace should be measured by what something produces, not how intensely it feels. Read that again. Peace should be measured by what something produces, not how intensely it feels. This is critical because in relationships, in business, in leadership, familiar patterns can feel powerful even when they are unhealthy. Urgency feels productive, chaos feels important, overextension feels necessary. And for Black women, who have often been taught that their value is tied to how much they can endure, grind culture can feel like identity. But intensity is not the same as impact. Familiarity is not the same as health. And urgency is not the same as intention. Let me give you another example. There was a feature highlighting the stories of Black women entrepreneurs who have been laid off and were now at a crossroads. These women were facing job loss, financial pressure, and the overwhelming temptation to react quickly without a long term plan. They were in survival mode. And survival mode tells you to move fast, to scramble, to replace the income immediately, to underprice your services just to get something in the door. But the advice they received from Dr. Rosie was radically different. She told them to slow down, build intentionally, know your numbers, strengthen your credit and financial foundations, create systems from day one. Do not just react, redirect. The women in this feature were at a crossroads. They could react out of survival mode, building without structure, hustling without strategy, or they could channel that urgency into intention. They could take the disruption and transform it into an opportunity to build durable wealth and autonomy. And here is what is so powerful about that. The article presented a pathway from survival to ownership, but that pathway required discipline. It required self trust. It required the willingness to slow down when everything in you is screaming to speed up. Because urgency is useful, but sustainable success comes from intention, systems, and clear thinking. And that is what India McLane means when she talks about accountability being the doorway to growth and shame being the barrier. Facing your choices honestly, taking responsibility, and learning from them creates room for healing and rebuilding. In business and in life, clarity, consistency, coachability, and support systems are repeatedly tied to stronger outcomes than solo struggle. But here's the hard part: accountability requires honesty, and honesty requires that you stop defending the survival strategies that no longer serve you. It requires that you stop calling dysfunction by softer names. It requires that you admit that what you have been doing, even though it worked for a season, is not working anymore. And that takes courage. Let me tell you about Jodica Edie. Eddie helped build a movement of 44,000 Black women. 44,000. But the story of how that movement began is just as important as the scale it reached. Early in her journey, Edie did not have the resources to attend a conference that could change the trajectory of her work. But community members from her hometown, people who believed in her before she had a platform, pooled their resources so she could go. They invested in her when she could not invest in herself. And that support changed everything. The movement Eddie built was not constructed through quick wins or isolated hustle. It was built through community investment, quiet consistency, and long term organizing. The challenge was real. She was working in survival mode while still building power, visibility, and collective action. But the solution was not to work harder alone. The solution was to build with others, to let support become part of the strategy. The result? A large scale network of Black women connected through shared purpose and political power. And the lesson is clear: Black women can move from isolated endurance to collective power when community becomes part of the strategy. This is what India McLane is teaching. This is what the Soft Girl Era podcast is about. It is the sacred space where strong Black women unlearn survival, rediscover softness, and reclaim the joy, rest, and freedom they deserve without guilt, without apology, and without explanation. Because here is the truth: you were not put on this earth to survive, you were put here to live. And living requires something different than surviving. It requires rest, it requires boundaries, it requires the willingness to say no without guilt. It requires the courage to ask for help. It requires the faith to believe that you are worthy of support, not because you have earned it, but because you are human. India McLane is guiding women through this transformation, one conversation, one boundary, one breath at a time. And the women who are listening, the women who are finally choosing themselves, not out of burnout, but out of reverence, are discovering something powerful. They are discovering that softness is not weakness, it is a radical act of self love. They are discovering that rest is not laziness, it is resistance against a culture that profits from their exhaustion. They are discovering that boundaries are not selfish, they are sacred. And they are discovering that the survival story they have been carrying, the one that has become so familiar it feels like identity, is not the same thing as peace. So let me ask you the question India McLean asked me: what part of your survival story has become so familiar that you now mistake it for peace? And what would change if you finally gave yourself permission to release it? Because the skills that got you here, the hyper independence, the overfunctioning, the emotional distance, the constant forgiveness, they served you, they kept you alive. But they are not designed to carry you into the next season. And if you keep holding on to them, you will keep wondering why peace feels so far away. Peace is not far away, it is right here. But it requires that you put down the cape. It requires that you stop glorifying the grind. It requires that you build with intention, with support, with rest, with boundaries. It requires that you measure success not by how much you can endure, but by how much joy, health, and freedom you can sustain. India McLean is showing us the way. And the women who are following her lead are not just surviving anymore, they are living. They are soft, they are rested, they are whole, and they are free. But here's what I need you to understand: this is not just about individual transformation, this is about collective liberation. Because when one Black woman puts down the cape and chooses softness, she gives permission to 10 more. When one woman sets a boundary without apology, she creates a blueprint for 100 others. When one woman builds with intention instead of urgency, she shifts the entire culture. This is how movements are born, not through loud declarations, but through quiet revolutions, not through more hustle, but through more honesty, not through proving strength, but through embracing wholeness. So here's my challenge to you today: I want you to identify one survival skill that is now blocking your peace. Just one. Maybe it is the hyper independence that keeps you from asking for help. Maybe it is the over functioning that leaves you exhausted and resentful. Maybe it is the emotional distance that protects you but also isolates you. Maybe it is the constant forgiveness that keeps the peace but costs you your dignity. Whatever it is, I want you to name it. And then I want you to ask yourself this question: if I release this, what would become possible? Because that is the question that changes everything. Not what will I lose, but what will I gain? Not what will fall apart, but what will finally come together. And here is what I know to be true: when you release what no longer serves you, you create space for what does. When you stop defending survival mode, you make room for sustainable success. When you choose softness over strength, rest over hustle, boundaries over people, pleasing, you do not become less. You become more, more whole, more free, more yourself. India McLane is calling us into a new era, an era where Black women are no longer defined by what they can endure, but by what they choose to embrace. An era where softness is strategy, rest is resistance, and boundaries are sacred. An era where peace is not something you chase, but something you create. And the question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you are willing to release the survival story that has become so familiar it feels like home, willing to build with intention instead of urgency, willing to let support become part of your strategy, willing to measure success not by how much you can carry, but by how much joy, health, and freedom you can sustain. Because the women who are willing, they are the ones who are changing the world, not by doing more, but by being more honest, more whole, more soft, more free. So I will leave you with this: what part of your survival story are you ready to release? And what would your life look like if you finally gave yourself permission to be soft, to be supported, to be at peace? The answer to that question is not just your future, it is your freedom. Thank you.